The traumatized ego. Um, if you keep up with my page, you know the shit I ramble about. I have unlocked yet more memories that were locked away in my traumatized ego. It is funny to note, and it is worthy of note, that the PTSD and CPTSD and even the extreme fear response I was experiencing was not me. That was my ego trying to keep me safe. Uh, the ego has the override code for the amygdala. Um, and my ego was hypnotized. Yeah, isn't that some shit? Stu did that. Uh, he wanted me to feel the fear of the entire church and how everybody was scared and see if I could move through that. Because, nobody really seems to understand how I work. And that's what the real problem here is. This is why all the fear training and altering my mind and shit all went bad. Because, think about it like this. I'm the first person in history to ever do what I did, and you expected me to operate like everybody else? That's the logic of a dumbass. Anyways, the traumatized ego. In psychology, a traumatized ego refers to the sense of self that has been overwhelmed by past experiences, often leading to a fragmented or defensive identity. When the ego is unable to process trauma, it creates a protective mechanism that can manifest as specific behavioral and emotional signs in adulthood. Keep fragmented in mind. Core psychological signs. A traumatized ego often struggles with its primary function of maintaining a stable, unified sense of self. That sounds like dissociative identity disorder. Fragmentation of the ego states. You may feel like your personality is split into different parts or states that take over at different times, sometimes leading to unstable, contradictory behaviors. Does that sound like the church leaders to anybody else? Because that sounds like the church leaders to me. That sounds like their stupid fucking whole I have two identities kind of thing. Fragile self-esteem. A deep-seated sense of unworthiness often leads to a constant need for external validation like praise or accolades to feel okay. That sounds like external validation. Loss of the authentic self. You might feel disconnected from your true essence, as if your childhood or certain parts of your identity were stolen or are currently missing. None of these church leaders had a proper childhood. They're all childhood soldiers. That's why none of them had a dad. And they're weird when you talk to them because they have none of the constructs of parental advisory over them. Hyperdefensiveness. Even gentle or constructive feedback can feel like a devastating personal attack, leading you to lash out or shut down. Stu or any church leader, whenever I corrected them or showed them the right way to do something and how they're like, I kill you! Yeah, I would argue that's hyperdefensiveness. Behavioral and emotional symptoms. These signs often stem from the ego being stuck in survival mode. The traumatized ego is stuck in survival mode. You are not your ego. These are two separate things. Control and perfectionism. Chasing perfectionism is often a defense mechanism used to avoid critical gaze of others to maintain the myth of control in an unpredictable world. I'm guilty of perfectionism. Interpersonal struggles, difficulty forming deep bonds, a fear of relying on others, or inability to set healthy boundaries. Once again, every church leader, let's talk about this. Difficulty forming bonds, a fear of relying on others. What does a fear of relying on others sound like? That sounds a lot like, let me do it! I don't care, I don't need any help! That's what that sounds like to me. Or, if you help me, I kill you! Because it's the fear that they might be codependent. Emotional numbing and volatility. You may experience long periods of feeling flat or detached. Disassociation punctured by sudden bursts of irritability and anger. Punctuated by irritability and anger. Yeah, that sounds like Stu in droves. Like, I think that's like Stu 24/7 personally. Negative self-talk, a persistent inner critic that focuses on perceived failures and shortcomings rather than strengths. Your cheerleader in your head isn't a cheerleader, it's a negative leader. I don't know what the opposite of cheer is. Miserable leader. Yeah. Common defense mechanisms to protect itself from further pain. Traumatized ego may unconsciously rely on these primitive defenses. Primitive defenses. Regression, reverting to childlike behaviors or emotional states when stressed. That's emotionally stunted, by the way. Projecting, assigning your unacceptable feelings like shame or anger onto others. That is every church leader in droves. Every fuck up Blondie made and every fuck up Stu made, they immediately projected those onto me because they can't deal with the reality that they're fuck ups. Intellectualizations, thinking about stressful events in a cold, clinical way to avoid feeling the underlying pain. Distracting yourself with thoughts instead of just sitting with the pain. Guilty of that personally, but I'm getting over it. Avoidance, steering clear of people, places, or conversations that might trigger traumatic memories. Stu did that when I talked to him. We now have a characterization of exactly where the dissociative, malignant narcissistic church leader's mind comes from. It doesn't come from normal trauma. It comes from ego trauma. Ego trauma locking the brain in the constant fight, flight, flee response, the amygdala brain, the subconscious brain. Now, that thing doesn't get into that, but in a really complex thing, it actually suggested that the ego is directly linked to the shadow self. And that feeds into what the wise were talking about when they said that there were certain rejected personality traits I needed to reject into my shadow self, so when they switched my unconscious minds and conscious minds, my unconscious mind would have the shadow self consciousness, I guess. So, inside your brain, there are roughly two consciousness functioning. The primitive, animal conscience and your consciousness. The prevailing mechanism in rational times, and in animalistic times, you have the animal consciousness. The conscious and unconscious minds. And the ego is some kind of bridge between the two. It's a gapping mechanism. I would have never guessed in a million years that you could traumatize a part of a person's mind without actually traumatizing the person. Because I've been doing all the rapid eye movements and all the things to get through trauma, but I couldn't get over it. And it was only when I sat with my ego and basically gave it a free therapy session with me, the guy that heals things. The one thing I'm actually good at. We had a long, long talk. We did. You see, it bothers me to no end that this entire thing I just found out was a theory I actually said to Stu back at Ingalls, where I was talking about PTSD, trauma, and how trauma emotionally stunts somebody. A traumatized ego becomes locked in that childlike state. Meaning, I would argue the dissociative identity these people have is one of man and child, and the emotionally stunted child is willing to commit all the atrocities because they're trapped in that brainosphere. Whereas the man is the adult. And we're not even going to get into the other sides of this, the facade and all the other things, because what the dissociative identity is a traumatized person that is so traumatized that the brain in the ego decided to fragment and separate it from the rest of the brain because the trauma that thing experienced is that bad. So it created a completely separate identity for it. That one's trauma Bob, and that one's normal Bob, and together they're a head case. So, in dealing in locked memories in my ego, this was actually really funny because I had the memory of Stu hypnotizing my ego, not me, but my ego, to work against me. So this entire time, kind of like how New World Order tells her Quark to rage against all the Quarks inside of Shigaraki, or whatever, when they steal her Quark and she just starts destroying him from the inside out. My ego, this entire time, was deliberately working against me because it was hypnotized into doing that, believing it was keeping me safe by what Stu hypnotized it to do. That's impressive. I would have never, once again, never guessed in a million years you could hypnotize somebody's ego into basically just stopping them from ever doing anything great. Very fascinating. Very cute, Stu. You can't handle yourself. You gotta be the biggest asshole on the planet. Because you're a coward. But that's neither here nor there. And the other memory I had was the false memory Blondie implanted. Yeah. When Blondie came to Papa John's, he accused me of knowing how to use a rotary phone because I told him during the calls with people, because he had me under hypnosis, there was somebody else talking on the phone and he couldn't accept that as a reality. Everything had to be my fault because he's a victim, and how is he supposed to be the victim if I'm not the bad guy? And the other bad guy could never be a church member. That's impossible. Somebody like Stu. That's against the rules. And as we know, the rules can never be wrong, even though they're wrong all the fucking time, and they should probably be ignored. Or be treated like the natural guidelines, but not a definitive rock. But, so, Blondie actually hypnotized me into saying I know how to use a rotary phone. Yeah. He hypnotized me into it. And you'll never guess how he did it. He had me search my backlog of every memory with every interaction of every rotary phone I had ever come in contact with. When I was in 4th or 5th grade, we went to a thrift store that's now closed that was down there in Ackworth, and I ran into my first antique rotary phone. Yeah. It wasn't hooked up, and I certainly didn't know how to use that one. So he rolled me back all the way back to 1992 or 1993, where I was about 2 or 3 years old. And I was playing with this phone. I think it had blue wheels or red wheels on it. It was white, it had stars on it, and it had these eyes on it that went back and forth on the front. It had a little rotary dial, and it had a red phone on it. So Blondie hypnotized that memory to be the truth memory. That I did know how to use a rotary phone because when I was a kid, I used that phone to call Santa Claus. I went over and I spun the dial, 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 and I called Santa Claus. On a child's play toy that was a rotary phone on wheels with googly eyes. There is a phenomenon in hypnosis where when you put in a false memory into somebody's brain, it causes not just a kind of disassociation, but it actually causes a kind of rift in the thought processes. So, because Blondie implanted that memory of me using the rotary phone, I only now accept and remember Stu continuously interfering and sabotaging my presidency through my regular phone, which is what actually happened. And this is why you shouldn't put false memories in people's heads just so you can be right, Danielle, Matt McGinnis. Because it's not true. And what you did was bastardly. Sometimes you're not the victim in it. And you need to accept that. And it is a narcissistic thing to be the victim in everything. And I know it's going to be hard for you to just go, you're not the victim, but you're not the victim. You never were. And if you want to say you're the victim, destroy your own religion, because it's the thing that did it to you. But you're not gonna. Because just like Stu, you need it. It bothers me to no end, but this shit feeds into Carl Jung, who identified Friedrich Nietzsche as a guy that had an ego inflation. This takes it a step further than just ego inflation. It takes it to traumatized ego inflation and ego hijacking. And as Carl Jung said, when the ego overtakes the brain, it looks like a demonic possession. Now, I have a really long, boring story I made up in Mr. Woodward's class that actually nobody could really read, so because I have a writing disorder, that actually covers this in a very bizarre and weird way. So, yeah. I'm probably going to tell that story.